Hello everyone, welcome back. In this video, we're going to talk about Chapter 8 from the Helicopter Flying Handbook, which is all about ground procedures and flight preparations. And as always, we're going to talk about stuff that's specific to helicopters, and we will cover the things that are common between helicopters and airplanes in our discussion of Rod Machado's book. Okay, so all aircraft, you pretty much want to do a pre-flight. Make sure that everything is airworthy. It's perhaps slightly more important, not that it's not important at all for an airplane, but it's even more important for a helicopter that you do a thorough pre-flight because helicopters got an awful lot more moving parts in them. So you always want to use a checklist, make sure that you checked everything that you're supposed to. Now, the book also mentions something called an MEL, a minimum equipment list. That is something that you're not so likely to fly with because that's something that's issued to an operator, usually a commercial operator. And in our case, we will use part 91.213 subpart D, which tells you what's the equipment that you need to have in that helicopter in order for it to be flown. And pretty much everything has to work, and if it doesn't work, but you can continue safely without it, you can placard it as inoperative. It's the same thing for an airplane, really. Okay, so talking about safety on the ground for a helicopter, you're getting ready to start that helicopter. Just like in the airplane, before you fire up the engine, you want to check around, you want to call clear. You might say, why would I call clear in a helicopter if I haven't engaged the rotors yet? Well, that's a good question. On many helicopters, though, there are moving parts which are accessible to people and animals on the helicopter when the engine is running. So there is still a potential for people to be injured if you start the engine and they're close by. Then once again, you will recheck for the area being clear before you engage the rotors. And we talked a little bit before about different kinds of rotor systems and different clutches. You know, we have the automatic clutches, centrifugal clutches that just sort of work all by themselves. We have electric clutches. Some different helicopters will have different forms of that. So, for example, the S300 CBI has an automatic clutch system where you put it to an auto mode and it automatically will pulse the clutch in and out in order for the rotors to get up to speed. In the Robinsons, there's pretty much just a clutch slit switch. You put it in and it does its thing. Some of the older helicopters, like the older Schweitzers, actually had a manual clutch. Some other considerations when it comes to approaching a helicopter. You always want to approach the helicopter preferably from the side. You can approach it from the front, but never from the rear, right? We have these choppy things called tail rotors in the rear part of the helicopter. If you can have eye contact with the helicopter pilot, that's best. Also, if you're coming into a sloped area, it is better to disembark on the downhill side. There's a lot more clearance. This rotor might be pretty close to the uphill side if there's a significant slope. Occasionally, you might have people getting in and out of a helicopter while it's in the hover. It's not a terribly common thing, but it is something you could do. Generally speaking, what's the best situation? You shut the thing down. It's not always practical, especially if you don't have a rotor brake, but when you can do it, that's what we do. Also, you don't want to be by the helicopter during startup and shut down. And why is that? Because those rotors can flex a lot until they get moving quickly. So you don't want to be right by the helicopter when the rotors are just starting to spin, because they might flex down and hit you. Same thing when they're slowing down at the end. You want to carry tools horizontally. Don't put them up over your shoulder or anything dumb like that. If you lose your hat, don't chase your hat. Just let it go. There was a guy at the Bloomsburg Fair some years back that was flying helicopters there. He was finishing his shift. He got off the helicopter. His hat blew away. He followed it right into the tail rotor. And unfortunately, he died a couple days later from those injuries. So once you've landed, you want to disengage the rotors. You want to wait until the rotors have come to a stop before you turn off things like the beacon. Sometimes people will say, why do I have to care about the beacon if that main rotor is just barely moving? Well, remember that the tail rotor moves around 10 times faster. So it might just be a big blur that nobody can see. All right, well, that's chapter 8. It's a fairly short chapter. Don't worry about it. We're going to make up for that with chapter 9, which is much, much longer. So if you have any questions, as always, go ahead and ask during our Q&A sessions, and I'll see you guys around.